All right, so we're going to move on now to habitat selection. So we're going to look at where do you want to live, and there are some definitions you probably should know. One is a home range. This is basically where the animal is actually found. So your home range, for you might be, hey, I don't know where you guys live, but say you live in Walnut. Hey, my home range is not just Walnut, but it's Walnut, and I go all the way out to LA and Riverside. So wherever you actually spend time is your home range. Now your territory may be Walnut, so it's usually more limited, and this is what you would defend. I'm not sure I'd defend Walnut, but that's a whole different issue. And then migration is leaving an area to go to another area throughout the year, depending on some kind of circumstances, which we'll talk about later. So what we want to do is start with some of the questions. So we want to look at some of the models of habitat choice and territoriality. Why are groups picking certain areas? We want to talk about learning, how they learn within those territories, family dynamics, what might affect how they pick areas, and then migration and navigation on the back end. All right, so habitat choice. So if I gave you two places and said, hey, I'm going to buy you a place to live, which one of these would you probably would like to be the view out of your front windows? And so most people, I would guess, would pick the one on the right, although there's some freaks out there that might like the left. I'm not saying the deserts are bad. I love going out in the desert, but if I had a choice, I think it would be the one on the right. All right, so habitat choice, Manfred Malinsky, a very famous study, ideal free distribution. So what you see here is they're dropping bits of food from pipes above, and they put stickleback fish into an aquarium, and they start dumping food in, and you can see they're putting 5 water fleas on the left and 1 water flea on the right for these stickleback, and they immediately, pretty quickly, not within any length of time, figure out kind of this distribution that there's more food on the left to the right, so more of the fish will go to the left, and then one goes to the right. It's something that we see over and over in animals. They quickly figure out what is the best place to be, and they kind of just even themselves out to the food. So very famous study. And he would change the numbers. You can see change the profitability, even if he started putting different numbers of, if all of a sudden this became 4 and this became 2, what you would see is one of these fish would realize, hey, you know what, there's less food over here, and they would be popping over here and kind of distributing themselves again differently. All right, just to give you a little more on this, a later study was done on ducks instead of fish. And they would have people throwing bread into the water. And again, depending on the amount of bread that was thrown, the ducks would actually ideally free distribute themselves. But Harper took this a little bit farther, and what he realized is some of the birds would be pretty aggressive within those patches, and so some ducks would get more food than others. So this doesn't not necessarily, they do distribute themselves this way, but it does not necessarily guarantee that every duck in each patch is getting the equal amounts of food. All right, ideal free distribution, not only food, but habitat choice can be with parasites. It turns out these gray frogs have the ability to determine where they want to lay their eggs, and they stay away from pathogens. What they found is they will stay away from other frogs that are diseased. But what they're looking for, the attack on these is actually from a flatworm. And flatworms, these trematodes actually have a couple of hosts. So their life cycles, they'll live in one host, develop, and then they'll live in another host. So the larvae of some of these flatworms will actually grow in snails. So the frogs will actually look for sites that are snail free, or if they have to, if the snails are everywhere, they will pick an area where the snails are less. So the idea is, hey, I'm going to figure out habitat choice just by quality of habitat, and how I'm judging that is disease and or parasites. All right. And then so learning in these anolis lizards, what they did is they have these immature lizards and they were trying to figure out how they pick territories. And so they kind of were making these territories. Sometimes lizards would actually be on them trying to breed and feed. And then on other times they didn't. So what they did is they set up a bunch of controls sites where some of the controls they actually had lizards living, and then others they didn't. And so what they would do is then take a young lizard and have them look and watch, and they would remove a lizard from a site. And it turned out that the lizards actually would go after the vacated sites, even if the two sites were equal. So the idea behind this is there's a learning process that, hey, if that guy liked it, maybe it's good. Maybe I should like it too. They had a tendency to go after sites that were already being used, and more it had to do not necessarily with food in this regard, because the food access was pretty equal. It turned out it was for safety from predators, they think, and then temperature changes, because these are ectotherms and very sensitive to temperature. All right, and then the last one here will be the family conflict. We're going to bring in the parent-offspring conflict. These are white-fronted bee eaters, and probably should put a picture of how they nest. They nest in cliffs, in little cavities in cliffs. The San Diego Zoo has a group of these in an exhibit that they built a fake wall with all these little cavities for them to use. And what they found out with these guys is the parents will actually discourage others from breeding around them, which often might limit how much others take food, things like that. But what they do is they will discourage their own offspring, because these guys are helpers. So their offspring from the season before, if they try to set up their own nest, they tend to try to discourage that. And then so the young will help. And it turns out their young male typically doesn't fight the parents all that hard. The assumption they think is that, hey, I'm related to these guys anyway. I'm saving my own genes. But it turns out as you go farther away, if a cousin is trying to set up, they will try to discourage the cousin also, but the cousin will put up a bigger fight. They're not as closely related, so it is not as beneficial to help you. And so they will continue to try to nest overall. So again, back associating with that parent offspring conflict.